Welcome to today's explainer on the motivation myth. If you've ever felt completely stalled out, even when you have all the right goals in place, the framework we're exploring today in The Motivation Myth by Jeff Haden is going to completely redraw your internal map. We're going to dive right into the core of the motivation myth to strip down those false assumptions keeping you stuck at the trailhead. Ultimately, what Jeff Haden shows us in The Motivation Myth is that you absolutely do not need perfect inner weather to begin your journey. It's a fundamental shift in how we navigate our daily routes.
I want to kick things off by asking a pretty surprising question, one that completely flips our usual understanding. And I want you to really consider this for a second. What if motivation is not what starts the trip? What if the spark you've been waiting for is actually created by that first step and not the other way around? Think about the last time you, say, dreaded going for a run. You're sitting on the edge of your bed, staring down at your running shoes, just waiting to feel energized. And you don't. But you force the shoes on anyway. You step outside, and 10 minutes into the jog, suddenly you feel highly motivated to finish. The spark didn't precede the action, right? Jeff Haden points out that the action actually generated the spark.
It's a quiet sort of pain that so many of us know way too well. You're stopped at a green light. Your foot is just pressed heavily on the brake. And, you call it preparation. You call it timing. Or, my personal favorite, you call it getting into the right headspace. But the road is completely open. This right here is the quiet pain of directionless ambition. You've got the goal, you have the notes, you've got the saved advice tucked away in a dozen different folders. You even have this perfectly clean morning routine mapped out, yet nothing moves. And look, I want to be incredibly clear here. You are not lazy. You are not guilty of some massive character flaw. Your operating system is simply miscalibrated. You're just stalled because your navigational map is pointing the wrong way.
The motivation myth delivers a profound reality slap on this exact issue. The book notes that waiting for motivation turns emotion into the gatekeeper of action. And that sentence, it's not an insult, it's actually a profound map correction. On UpGoWise, self-mastery is all about removing wrong starting points, and this book removes a highly seductive one. I mean, think about it. If you wait for the perfect feeling to strike before you move, you have essentially handed your navigation over to a completely unpredictable forecast. You're letting a fleeting mood decide whether you make progress on your life's work. Your operating system isn't broken, it's just relying on a wrong tool. It's like you're trying to use a weather vane when you actually need a compass.
So let's look at your old internal map. It tells you to feel ready and then start. It demands absolute sunshine before you take a single step on the trail. But this framework redraws the order entirely. Step 1, move. Step 2, feel differently. You don't sit around waiting for the signal. You literally create the signal by moving. Action has to come first to leave a trace of direction. The motivation you're seeking, it's practically guaranteed, but it only follows the physical miles you walk. It never, ever precedes them.
Now notice this familiar, protective little thought that pops up. When the right feeling arrives, I will move fast. Let's just pause here and validate that for a second. Because that belief sounds incredibly mature, doesn't it? It respects your energy. It avoids burnout. It knows that forced effort can sometimes sour the root. Man, I wish this weren't true. But look at where it leads. If a specific feeling has to arrive first, action waits. If action waits, progress stays unseen. And if progress stays unseen, motivation has absolutely nowhere to come from. It's just a closed loop. A feeling-led route guarantees that 0 miles are walked. It is a logical, self-preserving tactic that unfortunately keeps you anchored in the exact same spot forever.
Which brings us to a really fascinating dilemma. On one end of the spectrum, you have forcing motion with clenched teeth. This is, waking up at 4 in the morning off 3 hours of sleep, fueled entirely by caffeine and guilt, turning the path into rough gravel, and making every single step feel like a punishment. It's white-knuckling your way through a project until you inevitably crash. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have waiting for perfect readiness. This is polishing the map indefinitely, rearranging your desk for the 5th time, reading just one more article on productivity, and renaming your endless delay as discernment. What's wild is that both of these extremes are actually symptoms of the exact same misunderstanding. They both treat your mood as true north. They both assume how you feel dictates whether you can travel at all.
We need a completely new definition of motivation. It is the trail mark created by movement, not the starting coordinate. It's a reward you find along the route, not the compass that gets you out the door. When Jeff Haden breaks this down in the book, he likens it to a virtuous cycle. You take a small step, you see a tiny sliver of success. That success releases a hit of dopamine, and that chemical release is what we actually call motivation. It propels you to take the next step. Here on UpGoWise, intellectual refinement means seeing the hidden order in our daily routes. And the hidden order here is that you don't ask, do I feel ready? You use action as your next bearing. You ask, what step would make readiness less relevant?
And this brings us right to the second major trap we fall into, the summit trance. Look, a distant summit looks noble. A massive goal, like writing a book or losing 50 pounds, gives the mind a bearing. But if you stare at that massive summit for too long, the route directly in front of you just disappears. The summit is incredibly high, but the first step? It's plain. It's almost boring. So the mind starts to despise that plain step. Let's be honest, staring at a giant, multi-year goal is usually just a highly effective way to convince yourself you need a nap. That paralyzing awe of the massive goal is exactly what freezes you in your tracks. Hayden points out that professional marathon runners, they don't focus on the 26 miles. They focus on the next mile marker. They keep their eyes down. We have to shift our focus from the massive summit to the calming, practical reality of ground-level trail marks. The route saves you at ground level, not up there in the clouds.
So, what do these ground-level trail marks actually look like in real life? Well, they look like one paragraph, one call, one set, one page, just one. These are your trail marks. You don't need motivation to write for 2 uninterrupted hours. You literally just need enough momentum for 5 minutes on the very first paragraph. You don't need motivation to completely transform your body. You just need to get your shoes on and step outside. Beginnings must be survivable to reduce the fog. Each of these incredibly small actions tells the mind, hey, we are moving, and it leaves a clear trace of direction. The tinier the step, the less resistance your brain can possibly muster against it.
Let's think about this together for a second. What would you do today if readiness were no longer required? Just let that question sit for a moment. Give yourself a second to really answer it. Actually, scratch that. We aren't asking for a permanent identity shift here. Just today. If you completely remove the requirement to feel inspired, what is the single, tangible thing you would physically do right now? This question cuts right through the fog. It isn't asking for a totally new version of you. It's just asking for the next visible mark on the trail.
Now, what happens after you start moving? Well, you'll inevitably face another choice. On one hand, you might stubbornly keep walking a stale, ineffective route just because you've already spent so many miles there. You refuse to adjust because, hey, you've invested the time. On the other hand, and honestly, this is far more common, you might panic and try to change course at every patch of ordinary fog. You mistake simple discomfort for a glaring warning sign that you're going the wrong way. And what does ordinary fog look like? It looks like getting a polite rejection email. It looks like having a sluggish day at the gym where the weights just feel twice as heavy. It looks like writing a page of text that you know isn't very good. Once again, both the stubbornness and the panic are symptoms of the exact same misunderstanding, letting your feelings dictate the map. Ordinary fog is just part of the route. It doesn't mean you're lost. The question isn't, do I feel bright and inspired right now? The question is this route still linked to my chosen bearing?
So let's return to where we started. Sitting at that intersection. The green light was waiting for your foot to lift. It was never waiting for your courage. It was never waiting for divine inspiration to descend from the sky and grip the steering wheel for you. The open road only demands that you stop worshiping readiness. And that is the visceral correction this book offers. You don't need a grand vow. You don't need a perfectly optimized morning routine. You just need to physically lift your foot off the brake and let the momentum carry you forward.
Which brings us to the number 5. And this is the absolute core takeaway to lock in today. We are going to install a new trigger before you open your task list. If you notice you are waiting to feel ready, that is your signal to pick the next small step and just do it for 5 minutes. Why 5 minutes? Because, as Hayden points out, the hardest part of any task is overcoming that initial friction of starting. Our brains are incredibly skilled at conserving energy, right? They view starting a new task as a massive energy drain. But once you commit to just 5 minutes, you cross that threshold. The friction drops dramatically. You generate a tiny bit of momentum, the dopamine kicks in, and more often than not, you'll find yourself actually wanting to continue. Let the hesitation itself become the signal to simply move.
So, the next time you find yourself stalled, waiting for inspiration to strike, ask yourself a very simple question. Are you going to sit there at the trailhead waiting for the fog to clear, or are you willing to just take one blind step forward? Motivation is out there on the trail, but you have to walk out to meet it. Start before you steer. Go to upgowise.com and choose the next assumption to test.